100%. Now, coming further south, Cass, let's go away from the Hemsworths and the Efrons of the world. We're going through Coffs Harbour all the way down past Taree, ending up at Guesty and I's doorstep in a little place called Black Ned's Bay. Now, Guesty, would I be safe to say that that's where your apprenticeship was done?
Oh, absolutely. I've been fishing in that bay, the mouth of that bay, for longer than I'd like to say. So no, for a long time. Look, it's my home waterway, and yeah, no, it's a great place. It's one of those little places that's tucked away that sometimes you forget to go and poke your head in and have a look every now and then, and it's nice when you do go in there and just see what's going on and fish it. Fishes very well. Great fishery for flathead, whiting, luderick, brim, mullet, garfish.
Yeah.
Occasionally big kingfish goes bolting up there and turn around and come back out again. So it's one of those little surprise fisheries that you tend to pull the odd real good quality fish out of.
How about the story? So before I get to that, to paint the picture, it's if you look on Google Maps, for example, and I encourage you to get on there and look at these different waterways, it just looks like a big sand flat, doesn't it? That whole section. And then you see little pockets of seagrass and a little rocky reef here and there, and I think there's an old boat that's sunk and rusted out somewhere there. And other than it's got two little bays that run in and then a big bridge, but it doesn't look like much. But there's some of the old stories that you hear.
You're talking about Salts Bay there.
Salts Bay,
Sorry.
yeah.
Which is adjacent to Black Ned's Bay, yeah.
Some of the stories you hear from in and around that area back in the day, and you'd be able to talk on this.
Oh, absolutely.
The fish that came out of there.
In there, oh, absolutely. Which is it's different. So Black Ned's Bay, what John was talking about originally, is right in front of Swansea Bridge. It's got quite a narrow entrance and goes back into a lot of big, dark Zion weed beds up at the back of it there. Mangroves.
Yep.
It's a rural nursery sort of area with a sort of narrow channel that runs in there. But Salts Bay itself is the entrance to Lake Macquarie there, which has sort of like some shelly, sandy beds, some sand flats, a little bit of reef structure with with some cockleweed growing on it. A little bit of Posidonia in places there, not a lot.
Yep.
But some amazing fishing, and absolutely, I grew up fishing in there. You know, I had some fantastic stories of some of the fishing in there, and massive kingfish. You know, spraying garfish around in the middle of the night and around my boat, and great white sharks coming in there chasing seals that are feeding on Australian salmon. When I was a kid, Cass, I had when I first started working at McDonald's, when I was 14, first thing I did is I bought this old
60 years,
11
years ago.
Seriously? If you look as good as me and if I was that age, you'd be doing all right. But I used to go out there, Cass, and my brothers used to call me Aqua Boy because I just lived on the water all the time. Whether I was surfing, windsurfing, spearfishing,
whatever
fishing,
you were doing,
didn't matter. And I bought this old 11-foot, I think it was a little old Quintrex, and I did it up and painted it all, and then saved up some money and laid by a trailer, and then I could row around and put it in my trailer, and then I bought a little outboard motor for it. Yeah, so that was absolutely. And then so I'd go down there and in Salts Bay and get in behind what they call the sunken breakwall there, and I'd take 3 fence palings with me. So I'd go there late of an afternoon, and I'd fish there all night.
And take
a sleeping bag, and I'd sleep, no pillow, and I'd just sleep in an old sleeping bag on these 3 fence palings with my lines out all night and fish there all night until the sun came up. And that's what I did. That's how I grew up.
Cassie, for someone who loves fishing as much as you do, also, you'd resonate with that. Surely you did a little bit of that growing up?
I surely did sleep in the bottom of the boat, but it was my dad's fancy Stessel with a good floor that was carpeted. So I think I was a bit more
comfortable. You just got to go. It's
always one step further.
So you had carpet. What I wouldn't have given for a bit of carpet.
We did own the local boat shop, and that was part of what Dad did.
Right.
He fitted out the boats with all the nice floors, so we could have helped you with that.
Oh, I tell a lie. I did make a pillow out of a life jacket.
Really?
Yeah, sorry. I did. Sorry, can I just go back there because I said no pillow. I did have an old life jacket, which wasn't very comfortable, but I did have a pillow. So that's incorrect saying I didn't have a pillow. And I definitely got splinters in my backside out of the palings there at times. And I just woke up one night, I was laying there, pitch black dark, new moon, and I reckon it was about midnight, and I'd finally gone to sleep, and I'd caught a heap of big bream, and I had a couple of little live mullets set out at night time to catch a big flathead or something. And I don't know what time it was, 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yep.
I wake up and these guys were drifting through there, fishing, and they some big 150 horsepower outboard right at my ear, and they drifted into me because I didn't have my navigation. My fault. But I was tucked in behind this rock wall, no navigation lights on, because you never saw anyone in there back in the day. And they've drifted up against me and then started their engine right at me. Oh my God, man! You think I didn't shoot out of that sleep bag? There was fence palings went everywhere, and they, sorry mate, and off they went.
There's
Anyway.
an alarm for you. But I guess the thing to draw out of that is Salts Bay is a productive area, and we always talk about, fishing out of boats, but there is so many land-based options there, and I guess a part of this destination segment is going to be about not only how you used to fish it. I'm really keen to dig into some of the weird and wonderful techniques, and then I'm going to dig those secrets out. But also, what we can do and what has been done in and around that area to improve it, and why it might be so productive. So, Cass, before I dig into Guestie's secrets, which whether or not I'm going to get them out is a different story, I'm interested to hear about a bit of a project we've got going on down there. And I say we because I'm so proud to be a part of it. In and around the Saltmarsh, some of the mangroves there, all the way down to the water's edge, which is, I guess, all due to a landmark partnership between us and Landcare New South Wales.
You've just talked about dozens of different habitats down there, which is brilliant, and that's part of the reason that we've chosen this project to talk about, and it's one of my favourites in the Landcare partnership that we've been working on there at Salts Bay, and largely because we've really focused in on the Saltmarsh, and we don't get to do that very often in our projects. The salt marshes are notoriously difficult spaces to work on, but they're incredibly important to our fish species. We know that more than 70% of the fish that we love to catch and eat, both inshore in the estuary but also offshore in those close reefs, rely on that salt marsh for at least part of their life cycle. So it's really important area. You mentioned, Jono, the partnership that we have with Landcare New South Wales, and this is a great program that we have that's funded by the Recreational Fishing Trusts, which is your licence money. So that's important. Yeah, and it's about getting more people involved in fish habitat restoration, and by partnering with Landcare we really get to scale up what OzFish does and get them involved in fish habitat. So we're really excited about that, and we call this program Driving Fish Habitat Action, and it's our official Landcare partnership in New South Wales. So we're very proud of it.
The 70%, let's just hold up there for a sec. I'm not sure if anyone, sometimes we let these facts and figures kind of wash over.
Still digesting.
Yeah, it's going down the stomach. 70%. So of all the fish that we like to catch, Michael, and
fish,
anyone listening
prawns,
to this,
crabs,
they will depend, or 70% of them at some point in their life cycle will lean on Saltmarsh to feed, breed, nutrient-rich water, seek shelter. Or that is something that I think is lost in translation.
That's it. And don't forget that Saltmarsh is that sort of scruffy, grassy area that you see up behind the mangroves.
It's the most unappealing thing you've ever seen.
That's it.
It's not beautiful,
but
is it?
We know that it's actually more productive for producing fish food than the mangroves are themselves. So on those times that you've got your big high tides and the fish can get up in there, particularly the small fish. So we're talking all of the small juvenile and larval stages of 70% of fish that we love to eat and catch. So we're talking everything that you would catch in an estuary, and we're talking everything that you would catch on those close reefs, from the kingfish that Guesty was talking about before, mulloway, snapper, tailor, you name it. It's spent some time in the salt marsh, and not only has it spent some time there just because it happened to be there and it chose to, but because it has to as part of its life cycle. And if the salt marsh wasn't there to take up that part of the life cycle and help the fish move through that part of their life cycle, then that fish couldn't exist. So that's probably an important thing to know.
It's so unassuming. Like we always talk about, when I say to you, Guesty, hey, where did you cast for that? It's like, oh yeah, I cast it off the back of a root ball in the chasing cod, and it was a back eddy, and there was insects on the water. That sounds like habitat that I want to go see. You know what I mean? Or you talk about, oh, I casted my soft plastic in the middle of a seagrass and saw the flathead dust off some sand and come smash it. That's appealing. That's sexy. Saltmarsh, not so much.
No, but I think we've all got to understand that, if to come up with an analogy, it's like all of the hospital systems, the school systems, the preschools, all jammed into one. And we all, as we go through our life cycle, all visit those areas at different times, and they're so important to education, for well-being, all those things. And I urge people to have a look if you ever get a chance to just stop and smell, maybe not smell the roses, but have a look around your feet. And I think we're not, as humans, we overlook the macro side of things. And when I say macro, that's those tiny little things that Cassie's talking about. And there's nothing better to look down in that real shallow water and see tiny little flathead everywhere, all around your feet. And you go, wow, how cool is that? Because, within a few years, they're going to be fish that are, big enough, hopefully big enough for you to catch and eat one, or big enough to spawn and reproduce and make more of those. But flathead's just one of those species. They're easy to see quite often because you can sort of look in those little sandy bits or some of those areas and see them there, but it's the ones that you can't see that Saltmarsh is so important for.
The other really important kind of role that the Saltmarsh and the mangroves, they kind of work in a partnership here, speaking of partnerships, is the role they play in the buffer zone and kind of like filtering out the stuff that shouldn't be in the water.
Oh, 100%.
And it wasn't until I left the Ballina region when I went up there that all the rubbish and all the debris was in the Saltmarsh and the mangroves. And there's a reason for that, because it's protecting the waterway from what it does. But it does the same when there's a flood. But like whether or not it's rubbish or nutrient rich water, it all goes through there.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a selective process.
It's almost like the lungs of the system to a degree. Is that a fair analogy, Cassie?
Absolutely. Yeah. Spot on.
We should take your job. We're killing it. Saltmarsh.
Cassie's.
I don't know about that. I don't know about that. But I wanted to touch on that because Salts Bay, that's got Saltmarsh there. I was there. Luckily enough, I was down there when a few of these plants went in the ground, which we're about to talk about. But it's funny how you grew up there. I've fished there for 10, 15 years, and I never went in this particular area, which has played such an important part for the places where you were fishing.
Yeah, and I think it's good that, as humans, sometimes we want to leave those areas alone, but we still need to make sure that they're healthy. So it's a bit of a hard one, isn't it? Because you don't go right up in there, but we want to make sure that they're healthy and they're doing their job. So it's one of those little areas that as a fisherman, you're not going to catch your trophy fish there, but it's so crucial for the for
it's
that
like the
to
forgotten
happen.
child.
Yeah, but it's so important that it all works well. It's like you look at we've got rally car pictures here everywhere. At the end of the day, and I've seen ads on TV about it before. The only thing connecting $1 million rally car to the ground is these little tiny contact patches called tyres. But without them, you don't go anywhere. And it's a little bit like that. That's probably another analogy.
He loves his analogies. He's good at them too.
But do you know what I mean? So there's some of the things that you tend not to think about too much. You look at a flash car sitting in there, you go, wow, look, it's got a big engine and it's got great suspension and it does this and it's got a fantastic gearbox. But without the tyres, you've got no traction, no grip, you've got no anything. And that's the Saltmarsh is one of those areas that we just have to protect. And the fact that you don't go in there, I don't know what you think, Cassie, but less human interaction in those zones is probably a good thing, but we want the human interaction to make sure that they're healthy and they're doing their job, I guess.
That's right, and that's true of these ones. We can do a lot of damage, particularly driving over Saltmarsh, but walking over it in large numbers too. The plants are actually really quite delicate, and because they're growing with salt water, they're actually not very lush and thriving. They're plants that are adapted to grow in salt water, but they do that pretty slowly. So if you trample on one and squish it all down and kill it, or you drive over it in your car, it can actually take up to 20 years for those plants to be fully functional again as fish habitat. So that's a long time.
Just for the listeners who are listening at the moment, whether they're driving to work or listening
cooking
to
dinner,
whatever. Yeah, that's right. Relax and Fishing podcast goes. Just describe visually what a patch of Saltmarsh looks like. So just for the totally uninitiated, is it obviously, going off what you're saying there, and I know what it looks like, but it's not a green, lush plant, for example. So just for people who go, Saltmarsh, what am I looking for?
Yeah, and where do I find it? Because I think it's the grassy area that sits up behind your mangroves. So if you've ever, pulled your boat up in the mangroves and gone for a little walk, or, you've lost a lure up in there or something like that, and you've walked and you've popped out into this, grassy sort of scruffy looking area that sits in behind the mangroves, that's it. So there's there's a main plant that we see in most salt marshes, which is a salt cooch. So it kind of looks like your normal garden cooch, but a little bit less green and a bit more scruffy. And then there's a whole lot of succulents, because the succulents are plants that can really function to deal with that salt. So they take it up, and they do tricky things like put it all in one arm and then drop that arm off when it gets too much salt in it, and those sorts of things. So you'll see those sit up a bit higher and around through the salt cooch, and then you'll probably see a whole lot of rushes, so really pointy, spiky, higher bits and pieces that are through that, and it's quite patchy. So you'll see patches of the grass, patches of these succulents, and patches of the rush, which is a bit taller, and everything. Nothing's very vibrant. It's quite grey in colour, but the succulents will often be like a purpley colour or a red, because they're taking up that salt. So yeah, there's some interesting ones that are there if you look closely.
When I was up at Fishery Creek, Michael, there was these tracks, but I didn't know they were car tracks at the time. And I was there with one of the locals that was showing me around. And as we were walking through, he said, "See these?" And I just thought that was just a natural. They were 4-wheel drive burnout tracks from 15 years ago. And they were clear as day. You
Donuts.
You could have told me that they were done tomorrow. And he was saying that's how delicate and long it takes.
And interesting that you talk about those rushes. That's the picture I wanted you to describe, because from a distance you see those rushes more so. So those spiky rushes are what I sort of visualise salt marsh. That's the first key that tells me that salt marsh there is that sort of spiky rushes, which look like a fingered sort of filter system when you think about it like that.
I figured out your technique, Michael. You let the expert talk, and then you repeat what they've said, so it looks like you know what you're talking about. I figured it out.
Oh God, it's only taking you how many podcasts?
That's a bit mean, Jono.
That is a bit mean, but no, the rushes are what I see. Yeah. But it's interesting listening to Cass talk. I didn't realise there was so many other plant varieties that sit underneath that. So I'm thinking of those rushes, and I know where you're talking about. Where I've seen those tracks, and it's generally the area where those rushes grow. It's not like a clean white sand. It's more that sort of muddy, gritty sort of area.
You're not sitting on a beach in the wet sun.
No, it's a different sort of an area, and
sometimes that can look a bit sludgy under there, or have like a bit of a algae crust growing on it too from being damp, and all that stuff is good. Yeah.
Hey Cassie, at the in the discussions when you're looking at projects like this and the partnership you're talking about with Landcare New South Wales, how do you identify places like Salts Bay? How does that process come about? Because it's a brilliant option. It's a recreational fishing haven. You can fish off the bank in a boat. Guesty has already told us the fishing opportunities that are there. How do we identify that place?
Oh, super question. A lot of our sites that we work on with OzFish come from our members. So our local chapters say, we love this place, we think it needs a hand, what can we do? And the Landcare partnership is so good, because then we can go to the Landcare groups too and say, is there some fish habitat that, you would like to work on, because our people say that, we'd like to work here. And that's how these projects tend to come together. And we find a problem area that needs to be fixed in an area that fishers love, and we get started. We make a plan, and we protect Saltmarsh and mangroves and all of the fish habitats that are so important there.
So if I go down to my local nursery, which I've been doing lately, I've been doing some gardening.
I wouldn't put it past
you. No. Yeah. So I obviously can't go and buy these plants just to go and whack them in there. So where do the plants come from, and what's the replanting structure look like to rehabilitate these areas?
Yeah, Saltmarsh, like we were talking about before, the Saltmarsh is quite delicate, and those plants are quite unique. So you're right, nobody's growing them in nurseries. So what we have to do is make the right conditions for those plants to grow and thrive naturally. So there's often, weeds coming in and getting in around the edge of these places. So
I never thought of that, actually.
Yeah. And a big part of why I love this Salts Bay project so much is because we really got to address that in this project in a big way. So we got down there with the Landcare group, with a school group, which was fantastic to have them along, and with the local Aboriginal Land Council too. So lots of traditional heritage down there as well.
Sorry, can I just, before you continue there, just to paint a picture for you, Guesty, when I was down there, picture a whole class of students in the Saltmarsh with probably another 15 volunteers, and everyone is just ecstatic about putting plants back in the ground.
Oh, how good.
On a sunny day, someone had a speaker going too.
We had the tunes.
There was the tunes going.
80s music.
For people wondering
Cassie and I would want 80s
Cass
music.
is talking about,
Absolutely.
that's the scene that she's talking about.
How
Sorry,
good.
Cass, I did cut you
But
off.
that's how good is that?
I left just going,
but as putting my fishing hat on, which I've normally got on anyway, but but putting my fishing hat on as a fisherman, if you happen to be fishing in there and you say, what are these people doing? And how easy is it to just not understand the importance of that and just think, hopefully I'll catch a nice fish here.
Yeah.
Not thinking for a second that hey, I could be volunteering, I could be helping. And understanding, and that's why it's so important for us to talk about it here. And I know on the Relaxation Fishing podcast, quite often we're talking about, how to catch a marlin, a kingfish, a murray cod, a barramundi, a snapper, whatever. But a lot of those species, certainly those estuary based and offshore, inshore, I should say, species, without this type of habitat rehabilitation, they don't have the places to do what they need to do.
if I can round out this little chat with something that I learnt when I was down there, Cassie, and you'll be able to help me here. The bitu bush. That was something that when I was talking to a few of the representatives from Landcare and the council that were there, when I asked what are we actually doing, they were like, we're trying to basically replace the bitu bush by injecting a new wave. I think we did nearly 1,500 plants that day of native species that can fight it and can survive in those conditions. So for people, Guesty, you might be able to talk on this better than me, but for people that don't know what that type, it's an invasive species of plant, of shrub, that was originally introduced for, I think, bank stabilisation, until it just went way too far with it and took over the whole of the New South Wales East Coast, like most of our species.
Exceptionally
introduced
invasive.
for June stabilisation.
It does do a good job in some areas for that, but the trouble
a bit too good.
Exactly. The trouble is when you introduce those plants, then the actual more delicate, as Cassie's described it, native plants tend to be the losers in that environment. And anything that us as humans have tried to introduce in the past, I can't really think of too many winners. Let's go through a few numbers here. Feral cats, 0. Foxes, no. Rabbits, no good. Feral pigs, no good.
European
cane toads.
Cane toads is another one. And then, it just goes on. A prickly pear bush, there you go. So let's get into a bit of flora. Prickly pear, no good. So it just goes on and on and on. So bitu bush in those areas, it's a problem. There's no doubt.
Yeah, I liked
right.
the whole. When I was there, you can't help but sometimes ask, what is this going to result in? And the gentleman that I was talking to on the day, he said, well, bitu bush is all well and good for one particular role, dune stabilisation, but it doesn't attract the right insects that our fish, that we know 40% of our freshwater fish are feeding on, but also those insects, it doesn't attract. It doesn't do the same filtration as what our native species do. It doesn't, there was all these list of things, and I went, that's why we do it. And then you continue planting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was a real feel-good moment to know that we're really...
Yeah. And if you've got to look at, millions and millions and millions of years of flora development throughout Australia, it can't be wrong.
Yeah.
So you try and you've got to go with what works. And what works is what naturally grows there, and I think we've got to remember that. A little bit too. So
100%. So, Guesty, can I ask you a few questions?
Absolutely.